Welcome back, folks. We are looking at the best red cards for Commander within the upcoming Magic the Gathering set Foundations, releasing on November 15th. This set is designed around Standard and is designed to be legal in Standard for 5+ years, according to Wizards of the Coast. But we're going to be evaluating this from the perspective of Commander, just to see which cards will move the needle and which cards we might actually see in our Commander games. Before we get into it, just like to mention that I've made a set review videos for each color within Foundations, so you can check out the white, blue, black, red, green, and then I combined colorless with blue and multicolored with green, so you can check out all my thoughts on all of these other colors in the links in the description below. And also, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it and subscribe to see more awesome content from me. And also, how badass is this Omnath Locus of All art that I'm using for the background here? My goodness, is this so cool. So we're going to be looking at just Omnath, I guess, just destroy worlds while we go through all the best red cards. Starting us off here with Rite of the Dragoncaller, 6-mana enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 5/5 dragon creature token with flying, which is okay. The enchantment setup slot within Spellslinger decks, which I think this is asking you to play it in, is very, very limited, and 6 mana as a setup piece that quote-unquote does nothing the turn it comes down, I think is just really hard to justify in 2024 Commander. We do have Sunbird's Invocation in that 6 CMC slot, which I personally have cut from decks because it's just a little bit too slow. I'd rather play something like a Leyline of Resonance, actually, which says for only 4 mana, whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell that targets only a single creature you control, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Even in a dragon deck, you probably don't want to be playing an enchantment that cares about instants and sorceries. So instead, this is really intended to be in those Spellslinger decks where you are going to be slinging a lot of 1-mana cantrips to create those 5/5 dragon creature tokens. I will say that if this is left alone and you untap with this, then you will probably win the game at that point, because this is going to just bury your opponents in power and toughness on board. But I have a feeling it's just one of those cards that will get removed right away because it is so threatening, and so I think that it is just too much to ask at 6 CMC to do nothing in 2024 Commander. But this might go into your various Izzet Spellslinger decks, so like Niv Mizzet Perun, if you have like Dragon Synergies, you might want this. Stella Lee is a recent Spellslinger card that we've seen printed within, I believe, Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So I don't know, Rite of the Dragoncaller maybe should be in my honorable mentions, but it does have a crazy, insane effect, which is why I left it out of honorable mentions, because if left alone, this thing will win you the game. It's just, can we afford a 6-mana do nothing? That's the question. Moving on here, we have Twinflame Tyrant, 5-mana 3/5 dragon with flying. If a source you control deals damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. I think this is the best card out of red from the entire set, hands down. The comparables here would be Angrath's Marauders on a creature body, cost 7 mana previously. Now we're down to 5 mana, and it's on a dragon creature type, which is way more useful than Angrath's Marauders human pirate type. And at the 5 CMC slot, if we were to move outside of creatures, we have Gratuitous Violence at 5 CMC. So 5 is about the going rate to double your damage, but to be on a creature body, in particular in the dragon creature type, is absolutely huge for Twinflame Tyrant, because we can put this in decks like Miram Sentinel Worm, 6 mana 6/6. Whenever another non-token creature, non-token dragon ETBs create a token that's a copy of it. So you can easily start, creating token copies of Twinflame Tyrant, just copy, and now you are basically going to just win the game if you can clone this guy once or twice, because you're just going to be dealing so much damage. The only other deck I could think that would maybe want this, I mean, there's plenty of decks, but that would especially synergize with this, would be if you're playing a lot of X spells. So Mystics of the Is Magnus is sort of the typical X spell commander. I used to have a deck like, actually I still do have a deck like this, I just don't play it that much, but that's going to allow you to have instant sorcery spells be reduced by 1 colorless mana less to cast for each experience counter you have, and you gain those whenever you cast instants and sorceries with mana value greater than the number of experience counters you have. So Twinflame Tyrant, absolutely insane, and On its own, this thing will swing for 6 damage. I can't believe how this is going to be in standard for 5 years. I think this is just one of the biggest bombs that we've seen printed in recent memory within the damage doubler archetype. So Twinflame Tyrant, absolutely insane card, and we're going to see this a lot. Next, we have Firespitter Whelp, 3-mana 2/2 creature dragon with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature or dragon spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent, which is a nice welcome addition to the suite of whenever you cast a non-creature spell, deal 1 damage type of cards that we've seen. Coruscation Mage recently printed in Bloomborough, and Kessig Flame Breather has been around for a while as well. I have a Torbrand deck actually that aims to utilize these by casting various instants and sorceries that make tokens to trigger both impact tremor type of effects on top of these effects that will trigger whenever you just cast an instant sorcery, for example. But Firespitter Whelp also is valuable because while it is maybe a mana more expensive than something like a Kessig Flame Breather, it comes with a 2/2 flyer body, and it's the dragon creature type, which is pretty epic. So just a nice welcome addition to the toolkit for these types of effects. And this will go into, like I mentioned before, Torbrand style of decks and Spellslinger type of decks. So your Veyron Voice of Duality being the poster boy for various Spellslinger decks. I think this is a welcome addition to those decks. Next, we have Searslicer Goblin, 2-mana 2/1 Goblin Warrior. At the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, create a 1/1 Goblin creature token. This is a nice vegetable card in most Goblin decks, I would argue. We've seen this sort of before with Legion Warboss and Goblin Rabblemaster. Legion Warboss makes you the token at the beginning of combat, and so does Goblin Rabblemaster. So you have to wait until your end step by going 1 mana down on the ladder with Searslicer Goblin. But we've seen Legion Warboss and Goblin Rabblemaster be very powerful in Goblin types of decks, such as Krenko and Muxus. So I think this is just a shoo-in for all of your Goblin tribal decks. It's as simple as that. Next, we have Bulk Up, 2-mana instant, double target creature's power until end of turn, and it has flashback for 6, which is pretty nice, so we can cast it twice, even if it's at an egregious mana cost. Frankly, we don't have a lot of doubling power type of effects in Commander. Unleash Fury is the only real example on an instant. Otherwise, we have to move to Two-Handed Axe, which is an equipment that says whenever equipped creature attacks, double its power until end of turn. So I think you probably want to use this in various power doubling shenanigans type of decks. Nath of the Dire Hunt gives you another power doubling effect on herself as a potential commander. But I think actually what might be more broken with Bulk Up would be Ohair Axonil, which says if a red source you control deal an amount of non-combat damage less than its power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ohair Axonil's power instead. So imagining just doubling this guy to 8 power, that's so broken. Like Ohair Axonil, already a busted commander. I think that Bulk Up makes him even more busted by giving him another tool in his repertoire to buff its power. Next, we have Boltwave, 1-mana sorcery. It deals 3 damage to each opponent, which is the first time we have seen for only 1 mana we can deal 3 damage to each opponent. The equivalent would be Dragon's Approach at the 3 CMC slot, and we also have End the Festivities type of effects at 1 mana. End the Festivities, of course, deals damage to each creature in Planeswalker your opponent's control, but Boltwave is just going to deal a ton of damage, and can you imagine this card in Neheb the Eternal? For only 1 mana with Neheb on the battlefield, you can deal 9 to everybody and then add 9 mana at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. Absolutely insane for only 1 mana, and this spell will make Neheb decks so good. And of course, you can always mess with the amplification effects, such as Soulfim, doubling the damage up to 6. Although this is one of those cards where it doesn't replace itself, so you really have to be careful in how much card advantage you pack into Soulfim decks, because if you're only casting a 1 mana deal 6 to each opponent, you just have to make sure you're getting enough card advantage to replace or to refill your hand, rather. There's also Torbrand that this might see playing as well. And that brings us to our honorable mentions for red cards. Here we have Chandra Flameshaper, 7 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker. Okay, here's a tome. Just stick with me, folks. +2, add 3 red mana. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. Choose one and play that card this turn. +1, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste in the beginning of the end step. Sacrifice this token. -4, Chandra deals 8 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and/or planeswalkers. This is a pretty sweet planeswalker, but in a Commander, Planeswalkers are still just so bad, and even with this power, in Standard, of course, this is a powerhouse, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear, but in Commander, with 3 opponents being able to attack your Planeswalkers, it just doesn't quite make the cut. So whenever I evaluate Planeswalkers, I always evaluate them in the context of my Super Friends deck, which is using the Prismatic Bridge to basically play them for free. So the metric I use for Planeswalkers is, would I like to see this come off of a Prismatic Bridge trigger for free, essentially? So basically casting it for 5 mana, and I think Chandra's role in a Super Friends deck would be to use her -4 off the bat to then clear the board of any problematic creatures, and then after that, you'd probably want to start plussing her for the card advantage. I think that you'd be really hurting if you cast this for 7 mana, so you'd really have to cheat this into play. I don't know. It's a little scuffed, and I don't know that I would even include this in my Super Friends deck, just because while it does provide a lot of protection, the downside is that if you can't cast this for free, you're basically paying 7 mana to clear out maybe 2 or 3 problematic creatures, and that's just not good enough, and it doesn't give you a win condition on the card, which is also something that must be asked of Planeswalkers and Super Friends decks. So because it doesn't have an I win button on it, it has points taken off, so I think that's why it's in the honorable mentions here. Next, we have Dragon Trainer, 5 mana 1/1 creature human. When this creature enters, create a 4/4 dragon creature token with flying, which is basically a red version of Bear's Companion, which creates a 4/4 green bear creature token. Obviously, Dragon Trainer is better because it gives the dragon creature token flying. You'll be wanting to, copy this, flicker it, do all of the stupid broken stuff that you can do to just spam out a bunch of 4/4s. It does cost 5 mana, so theoretically it'd be nice to cheat this into play. Hard casting this for 5 mana to get a 5/5 power on board is very scuffed in Commander, so you want to be breaking this by flickering it, copying it, all of that stuff. Next, we have Electroduplicate, 3 mana sorcery, create a token that's a copy of target creature control, except as a haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sack this token, and we can flash it back for 4. The going rate for this type of effect is about 3 mana already, and I think what sets this card apart is that you do get the flashback for 4, so it's basically 2 cards in 1, which I do appreciate, and it's just a nice include for your Obeka Brute Chronologist decks, which are going to allow you to just create a token permanently by tapping Obeka to end the turn and skipping through that end step trigger. So that brings us to our top 3 cards from Foundations, and if we could get a drum roll please, we have Twinflame Tyrant, Firespitter Whelp, and Searslicer Goblin. Of course, Twinflame Tyrant takes the cake for this whole set, I think. Outside of maybe Bloodthirsty Conqueror in black, I think Twinflame Tyrant is maybe the best or second best card in the entire Foundation set. This is going to be just an insta-slam in so many Dragon decks out there. Firespitter Whelp, just a nice addition to all of the various suite of creatures that deal deal damage when non-creature spells are cast, and Searslicer Goblin I think will just be a shoo-in for many Goblin decks. So that will wrap up the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it and subscribe to see more awesome content from me. And yeah, that's where we'll wrap up the video. So thank you all for watching once again, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.